don't see it. Oh, our backup prayer will be offered by our good delegate from Baltimore County.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Our precious Heavenly Father, again, we thank you for this day and your blessings, the joy of serving you and the joy of serving the great state of Maryland. Father, I'm asking you in the next few days, let us not grow weary in well-doing. Let us be reminded of your glory in this holy week that we're participating in this week, that you will guide us, direct us, give us your wisdom, give us your ear, and let us have your attention. And everybody says, amen.
Amen. Quorum call.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their presence? If so, the clerk will take the call. There being 105 members present, the House is now in session. Clerk will read the journal from the previous day.
Annapolis, Maryland, March the 22nd, 2023.
Recognizing the Deputy Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Moves so much be considered the reading of the journal.
So ordered. Petitions, memorials, and other papers. Yea and nays. Number 2, House bills passed in the Senate. The clerk will read the bills.
House Bill 913, House Bill 916, House Bill 920, House Bill 1059.
Message from the Senate. Consent calendar number 33. Senate bills introduced in the House. The clerk will read the first bill and committee assignment.
Senate Bill 192, Senator Sidnor, House Rules.
Recognizing the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So much to be considered the reading of SB 192, to be considered the reading of all the bills on the calendar.
Hearing no objections, the bills are read the first time and referred to the appropriate committee. We're going to hold for a couple of minutes so we get more of our members into the chamber. Calendar of third reading Senate Bills number 15. Calendar of third reading Senate Bills number 15. The clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 312, tax clinics for low-income Marylanders, funding, repeal of sunset.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 126 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 312, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 435, property tax credit, disabled law enforcement officers and rescue workers, definition and eligibility.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 130 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 435, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read next bill.
Senate Bill 518, tax sales revisions.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 129 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 518, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Gentleman from the Eastern Shore.
Sorry, Madam Speaker, my button didn't work, and I'd like to be recorded in the green.
Declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 716, State Board of Examiners of Landscape Architects, sunset extension.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 129 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 716, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 717, State Board of Stationary Engineers, sunset extension.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 130 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 717, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 822, Pathways in Technology Early College High P-Tech School Program, high school diplomas.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 130 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 822, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Calendar of third reading, Senate Bills number 19. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 55, Maryland Estate Tax Portability Time Period for Election.
It's on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 130 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 55, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 184, Health Insurance Diagnostic and Supplemental Examinations for Breast Cancer, Cost Sharing.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 130 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 184, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 200, Health Occupation State Board of Chiropractic Examiners Disciplinary Actions and Procedures.
is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 131 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 200, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read next bill.
Senate Bill 322, Alcoholic Beverages Class 4 Limited Winery License Food Service.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 131 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 322, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read next bill.
Senate Bill 377, Workers' Compensation Benefits Offset and Study.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 131 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 377, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Calendar of third reading, Senate Bills number 32. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 115, Juvenile Court Concurrent Jurisdiction Juvenile Offenses on Military Installations.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 132 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 115, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 185, Maryland State Police Gun Center Firearms Surrendered Under Final Protective Orders.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 123 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 185, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read next bill.
Senate Bill 253, Estates and Trusts Registers of Will Electronic Filing and Signatures.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 130 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 253, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read next bill.
Senate Bill 340, Criminal Law, False Statements, Emergency or Commission of Crime, Anti-Swatting Act of 2023.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 133 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 340, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read next bill.
Senate Bill 342, Baltimore County Circuit Court Judgeships.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 132 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 342, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read next bill.
Senate Bill 608, Human Services, Maryland Statewide Independent Living Council.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 132 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 608, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed.
Madam Speaker.
Yes, gentleman from Baltimore County.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I apologize. Senate Bill 1852 read, please.
Gentleman from the Eastern Shore.
Senate Bill 185 to read.
Gentleman from Calvert.
Senate Bill 312 to read.
Gentleman from Anne Arundel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Same. Senate Bill 185 to read.
Gentleman from St. Mary's.
Senate Bill 185 to read. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman for Anne.
Thank you,
Anne
Madam Speaker.
Arundel.
SB 185 to read.
Okay. Same.
Senate Bill 185 to read.
Madam Speaker,
Yes.
185 to read.
Okay. Any other changes?
Madam Speaker.
Yes.
Madam-
To read, please.
Yeah, we got you. Yes, gentleman from Baltimore County.
185, thank you.
185 to...
Read.
Okay. Any other bill changes?
I'm going to join in.
Excuse me? Gentleman from Baltimore County.
I'm going to join in. Read on 185. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Calendar of third reading, Senate Bills number 16. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 124, Maryland Food System Resiliency Council.
Is on third reading and final passage.
Madam
Is there any debate?
Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker.
Which one got up first? Oh, gentleman from Calvert.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have an amendment at the desk. It's amendment number 124-993028/1.
Amendment number 1.
Move so much be considered the reading of the amendment, Madam Speaker.
So ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's my understanding that this bill, Senate Bill 124...
Ho. We don't have that.
Sorry. Thanks. It was provided.
Huh?
I'd like to thank my good friend from Southern Maryland for doing that for me.
It's Senate Bill. Can you repeat the number again?
Absolutely, Madam Speaker. It is 124/9933028/1.
Amendment number 1.
Move so much be considered the reading of the amendment, Madam Speaker.
Hold on a second. Do you have it? So ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So this particular bill it's called the Maryland Food System Resiliency Council. And I just want to make sure that I understand the bill. So if there's someone that understands this bill who is the floor leader, I'd love to.
With pleasure.
Floor leader.
So this bill, it looks like its purpose is to change the makeup of the council, and then I guess what I'm trying to figure out is what does the council do?
Yeah, so the council is related to food systems, making sure we have a resilient food system in the state. This council already exists. The bill just moves it to MDIM, which is a new agency. It does add a couple of new members to the council as well.
So I guess one of the things the council does, at least pursuant to the fiscal note, I'm guessing, is that it makes sure that there's enough food in the state that's grown in the state to feed the people of Maryland. Does that sound about right?
Sure, that's one of the sort of broader goals, I would say.
And then I believe the bill also moves the council under the executive branch of state government.
Under MDIM, yep.
So the governor, in theory, I guess, could, if there was an emergency or disaster, he could do certain things under executive orders. I'm presuming, maybe.
I think he probably has emergency powers, irrespective of the bill. Yeah.
Of course. Okay.
Yeah, it's just an advisory council, so it doesn't give the governor any new powers.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. So the purpose of the bill, as my understanding is, it's to make sure there's enough food that is grown in Maryland and that the food is safe. And I think that makes good sense. It also makes good sense to add this amendment. And the purpose of the amendment is to have the very same council that the bill refers to make recommendations on measures, including recommending regulations to prohibit a non-resident alien who is a citizen of the People's Republic of China, a commercial enterprise or business incorporated in the People's Republic of China, or an individual employed by or associated with the government of the People's Republic of China from purchasing agricultural land, including land used for raising livestock that is located in Maryland. So the purpose of the bill is to make sure that if someone, the purpose of the amendment, is to make sure, to summarize, that an individual cannot purchase land, agricultural land, in the state of Maryland and operate that land for livestock or agriculture, so that we can ensure our food safety and make sure we have minimized food insecurity, and that individual cannot be a member of the CCP or a resident of the PRC. Makes good sense. This is a problem. It's a problem that already does exist. And I think that it makes sense for the council to look into this. And as I said, this amendment says the council shall make recommendations on measures. Okay? Doesn't tell them what to do. It says shall make recommendations on measures. So I think that's pretty straightforward. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First of all, let me just say I appreciate the maker of the amendment providing the amendment to the committee in advance. It looked very familiar because it actually seems to be taken verbatim from the author of the amendment's bill, HB 968, which is still pending in the Environment and Transportation Committee. But I would urge the body to resist the amendment. With all due respect to the great people who serve on the Maryland Food System Resiliency Council, they are not qualified to deal with issues related to foreign affairs, related to China, related to, for example, the use of real estate investment trusts or shell corporations to buy agricultural land. It's simply a topic that's outside of their expertise. Honestly, with all due respect to the amazing chair, asking this council to study this issue would be sort of like asking the protocol committee to study whether the United States should withdraw from NATO. Vote red.
That's simply not true, because the purpose, Madam Speaker, of this amendment is to make sure we have food security in the state of Maryland and food resiliency. And the purpose of this council is to do exactly that. That's what the bill does. So the comments are simply not so. And I think it's also important to say this for the Republican colleagues that I have in the House of Delegates, namely that there are a lot of Republican bills that are still stuck in committees, including every single one of the priorities of the Republican caucus. And so this is our way of getting our bills on the floor. And we take it very seriously. And this amendment should be taken seriously. We are in a de facto war against the PRC. It is a de facto war, without question. I want to make sure we have enough food in our state, too. I want to make sure that we, the citizens, as well as the people in this legislature, ought not be saying to the citizens, maybe you should all have a garden right now, because we might have a problem if we go to war. And so I think this amendment should be taken seriously, irrespective of what is stuck in committees, because we all know how that goes. This is what we have in front of us, and it works perfectly with this council. That is literally what they're charged to do. Make sure there's enough food in Maryland. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from St. Mary's.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So we have a bill that's stuck in committee and an amendment on the floor. And I always love that argument. Well, the bill's stuck in committee. Well, hey, this is the process here. This is the process. We're allowed to amend bills on the floor. You choose to exercise the supermajority by denying most of the amendments. But this is the process. And I'm trying to figure out why the bill and why is the amendment not being actually considered. I mean, I believe in the golden rule. You treat others as you would have treated to you, have done to you. You know, it's illegal for Americans to own agricultural land in China. There's already 6 states in our country that bans this. There's 8 other states that ban agricultural foreign investment. That's 14 total for those that like to subscribe to Common Core. The Communist Party of China is systematically buying farmland in this country for a reason. And look at the recent track record. Just unleashed a deadly virus on the world, then lied about it. Hey, remember that deal where they told us it came from a wet market? That was a heck of a conspiracy theory if you want to look at conspiracy theories. They just flew a balloon over the country and looking at sensitive military bases. Hey, maybe they were checking out real estate value. You never know. We are being reconned. And lately, they just recently trying to undermine the United States on their oil reserves. You're trying to replace the dollar. The Communist Party of China is not our friend. We should start treating them as such. This is a good amendment, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from Anne Arundel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. In other words, those who do not learn from the mistakes of the past are doomed to repeat them. Let me give you an example. In 2008, we faced what was called, or what was said to be, the world's largest financial and investment bank crisis since the Great Depression. What was at the cause of that? Investment bankers. What were they doing? They were lending money out for mortgages, sometimes good mortgages, oftentimes mortgages with exaggerated values, exaggerated income, exaggerated assets, and poor credit. And what they did was then they would put them into a grouping. As an illustration, imagine a bag of 500 mortgages. 250 of them are good, 250 of them are junk. And what they did is they went to Moody's and Standard & Poor's and said, we want you to put a AAA bond rating on this and call it Prime Chuck. And you know what they did? They did. And what happened was pensions, individual portfolios, retirement plans went in to those mortgage-backed securities. And that was all fine and dandy until there was a crack in the dam and the values started to come down. And like a house of cards, it all crumbled, taking billions of dollars of retirement funds, portfolios, dreams down the drain with it. You remember some of the players, Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, Countrywide. Everybody in here is old enough to remember what happened.
On the amendment.
This is on the amendment, Madam Speaker. Thank you. So what happened? Some of these banks actually survived, and some of the financial advising salespeople said, we have to find a way to recoup these losses. We have to find a way to make some of our investors whole. Where did they look? China. Why did they look at China? One, it was an emerging market. It was one of the fastest growing economies in the world. And they have some of the loosest international financial regulations in the world and still do today. Anybody in here can look this up. It's still ongoing. So what happened? These investment salespeople looked for companies in America, shell companies like they were just brought up, but legitimately traded stock on the U.S. stock exchange companies. Let's call it the One-Eyed Flower Power LLC here in America. Went through all the regulations, being traded on the U.S. stock exchange. Then they targeted companies in China. Let's call them Wind Power Forever in China. And they contacted them and said, listen, how would you like for us to take your Chinese company to the U.S. Stock Exchange? You've been sputtering around over there. Here's what we need you to do. If you do what we ask, we are going to bring tremendous value to your company. This is how we're going to do it. We are going to do what's called a reverse merger. Here's how a reverse merger works. They merge that Chinese company with an American company. And they take it to the stock exchange that's already there. But what they ask the Chinese companies to do is take your financial documentation, your balance sheets, your revenues, and multiply it times 10. So if you make $400,000 in China, we want you to put on your financial sheets that you make $4 million a year. If they rebutted, they said, don't worry about it. You will not get in trouble in China because, and this is fact, international regulations say they go through a variable interest entity. Chinese companies use this structure to skirt U.S. financial regulations. Chinese government refuses to allow any of the audit firms from releasing its finding without consent of the Chinese financial regulators. And voila, now they're on the U.S. Stock Exchange. And these salespeople then called their buddies, the financial journalists, and said, listen, we want you to look at this Chinese company. It's doing $4 million a year in revenue. And they would then start to call their American investors and said, listen, we know you lost your shirt. We have the opportunity of a lifetime for you. Do you want to get on the ground floor of a Chinese company that's currently trading at $3 a share right now? We believe it's going to go to $30 a share. If you don't believe me, there's a company called Roth Capital. Roth Capital is well known. They're on the West Coast for having huge parties to the point where Snoop Dogg played there. Rat played there. Poison played there. General Wesley Clark was on their board. Roth Capital, you can look them up. And this went on for a long time until a couple investment banks up north looked at it and said, something's not right here. They then looked to China, sent investigators over there and found out that the shell company in China really wasn't producing anything. And they shorted it. Once again, taking millions upon billions of taxpayer dollars down with it. Now, why is it important to this amendment? Because I just illustrated to you, they do not live by our financial regulations. So they can be taking U.S. money in these Chinese companies and buying land here in Maryland. We should not allow that. That is dangerous to everybody in here. It puts us at risk of what we did in 2008. Let me end this with another Chinese proverb that says you cannot catch fish in clean water. In muddy water, you can catch a lot of fish. Let's not muddy the waters by letting this Ponzi scheme of sending money over to China and back here to buy our land happen. With that, I push the amendment, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker.
Floor Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Speaking of Snoop Dogg, I feel like I may need some gin and juice after all that talking. First of all, I don't at all mean to bemoan the minority's right to put amendments on the floor, and I also don't mean to belittle this issue at all. It's a serious issue, and in fact, bipartisan legislators across the country have taken actions on this. It's something Democrats have supported, Republicans have supported, but it's really complex. As we just heard the gentleman from Anne Arundel talk about, we have to deal with shell corporations, we have to deal with all sorts of complex financial instruments. We have to make sure that by banning the Chinese government from buying property, we're not making it more opaque. We're not essentially encouraging them to use things like real estate investment trust, thereby making it even less transparent. It's a complicated issue. It's one that does deserve debate and study, I think. However, this Food System Resiliency Council, which is mostly made up of nonprofit food advocates and public school teachers, is not the vehicle to discuss something this complex and this touching so substantively on foreign affairs. So again, Madam Speaker, I would urge the body to resist the amendment.
Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from Baltimore County.
Just real quick, and I appreciate the gentleman's point because he clearly thinks this is a potential issue, and I agree with a lot of those who spoke already. And I think to what happened earlier today with the minimum wage as an example, a bill that we passed last year or several years ago that we came back in this body and changed, I think because of this country's far too dependent reliance on the Chinese for whether it's consumer goods, commercial goods, medical supplies, pharmaceuticals, I think something needs to be done now. And if we figure out that for whatever reason we have to adjust this next year, then we can come back next year and adjust it. But you're talking about a growing bipartisan concern, as he said, that, again, I agree with, in Washington, D.C., that says this is a serious issue. This is an issue that here in Maryland we can finally say that we're going to lead on something that we all can hopefully agree on, that something needs to be done here to protect our food source. And I also agree with this amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed?
No. Roll call.
Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails. Are there any additional amendments to the bill to its title? Recognizing the gentlelady from Baltimore County.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have an amendment at the desk. Amendment number 133523/1.
Amendment number 1.
Move so much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a fairly simple amendment. And, this Maryland Food System Resiliency Council has some smart people on it, including one member that's here on the House floor. And I think they are certainly up to the task to study the previous amendment we had. But this amendment will give them another thing to study, which is study the potential effects on food supply on the establishment of an increase in the number of solar farms on agriculture land. My district had, prior to redistricting, about 2/3 of it was agriculture land. It's not as much, but I still have ag land. And certainly my friends on the shore will talk about the concerns they have about solar farms popping up everywhere. Additionally, the study required under this section will include potential effects of the state's renewable energy portfolio standard targets of 50% from Tier 1 renewable by 2030, and the potential impact of accelerating the new renewable energy portfolio standard on a path to 100% clean electricity with zero carbon emissions. So what we're seeing are farmers that are aging. We're seeing farms that are owned. They've been in families for generations. And the kids, have found other work to be engaged in. And they don't want to come back and run the farm. Farming is hard work, as our farmer on the floor will tell you. I mean, you have to feed your animals every day. They don't get Christmas off. They don't get Easter off. They work every day. And so farmers are finding it attractive with the subsidies that are offered now for solar farming. It's an interesting equation. They can do the math. They could create a solar farm with deep state subsidies and not have to get up at 5:30 every day to feed the cows. So this would simply ask this Resiliency Council to look at that, because that is a huge part of our food. We need to make sure that our rich and admirable and plentiful agriculture land in Maryland is going to stay agriculture land so that we can eat local food and grow local food. So I would ask that you vote for this amendment. It just adds one small task onto this Resiliency Council's duties. Thank you.
Floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would once again like to thank the author of the amendment for sharing it with the committee in advance, but unfortunately I will be asking the body to resist this amendment as well. The state actually did recently study this issue about solar panels on agricultural land back in 2020. Governor Hogan actually convened a task force on renewable energy development and siting. It was actually staffed by our good friend, former Delegate Andrew Casserly, and they issued their final report in 2020. They concluded that between 0.4% and 1.7% of the state's agricultural land would be needed to accommodate solar installations, but that most of that land could actually be used symbiotically alongside both agricultural and solar. Now, if the good delegate from Baltimore County thinks that the 2020 study is too dated or too superficial, that's fine, but again, the Food System Resiliency Council is not the appropriate venue for this study. You can just look at the membership of this council versus the membership of the 2020 task force and see the problem here, which is that this council, unlike the Hogan-Casserly task force, does not include any experts on energy policy whatsoever. So I would urge the body to resist the amendment.
The maker of their amendment.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. You must have been reading my mind, because exactly right. I do think that's dated, and I do think the people on this council are very capable and certainly would be able to recreate that study in a lesser aggressive fashion. But we've been moving very aggressively towards these RPS standards, and with some in this body that would like to go to 100% renewable, it's certainly something that we should look at before we push those policies forward. Thank you.
Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from Calvert.
Sure, Madam Speaker. I rise to support this amendment. The floor leader, to his credit, always does a good job defending bills and denying amendments. One of the things he brought up is the solar can be built, and then you can have simultaneous farming, or you can have farming that works with it. That's not so. Solar and farming are a zero-sum game. Every time you put solar on a farm, which is a misnomer because you're not farming at all, you are taking out the practice of farmland. You can't farm land that has solar panels on it. It just doesn't work. Now, we've seen bills before, for pollinators in solar panel farms, if you will. Again, a misnomer. But you're not growing corn, you're not growing food, you're not growing things that people can actually eat. And increasingly on the western shore and on the eastern shore, you see these farms and you're like, wow, that used to be a corn farm, or that used to be a soybean farm, or that used to be a tomato farm. Now it's a bunch of solar panels. So this amendment is very well thought out, because it's saying, this Resiliency Council, whose job it is to make sure we actually grow enough food to be self-sustaining in the state of Maryland, should look into exactly how much food production would be taken out of place if we kept building these solar farms, and how that would impact food security. So the governor never actually, I think Mr. Casserly never actually studied how much food we would actually need. They just studied the amount of land that was being used for solar panels. And that could accelerate really quickly, and we could find ourselves in grave trouble of not having enough food if we continue down this path. This is a pretty straightforward amendment. It's very well thought out. And it's exactly in the mission of this council. So for all those reasons, I support it.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails. Are there any additional amendments to the bill or to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered. It's on third reading and final passage. Is there any further debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
clerk will take the call. There being 130 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 124, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read next bill.
Senate Bill 274, State Retirement and Pension System, Earnable Compensation, Non-Vested Former Members, and Immediate Vesting.
It's on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 131 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 274, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read next bill.
Senate Bill 328, Board of Public Works Public Comment Act.
It's on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 132 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 328, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read next bill.
Senate Bill 346, Maryland Sign Language Interpreters Act.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 99 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 346, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read next bill.
Senate Bill 580, Public Safety Officer and Community Wellness Training Grant Fund.
It's on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 132 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 580, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed.
Madam Speaker.
Yes.
Vote change on House Bill 590 to yea and Senate Bill 185 to nay.
Any other vote changes? Calendar of third reading, House Bills number 93. Clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 201, Maryland Consolidated Capital Bond Loan of 2023.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 130 votes in the affirmative, House Bill 201, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Calendar of third reading, House Bill number 94. Clerk will read the first bill.
House Bill 284, Environment Statewide Recycling Needs Assessment and Producer Responsibility for Packaging Materials.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 99 votes in the affirmative, House Bill 284, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read next bill.
House Bill 988, Family and Medical Leave Insurance Program Modifications.
It's on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will take the call.
Madam Speaker.
Clerk will take the call. There being 93 votes in the affirmative, House Bill 988, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Calendar of third reading, Senate Bills number 13. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 443, real estate brokers, salespersons, and associate brokers, continuing education courses, alterations.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 131 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 443, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 455, real estate appraisers, licensing and certification, qualifications.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 130 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 455, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 525, economic development, program participation, cannabis business establishments.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 122 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 525, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 541, cigarettes, wholesalers, disclosure of information.
It's on third reading and final passage. Is
Madam-
there any debate?
Madam Speaker.
Gentlelady from Baltimore County.
Thank you. Could the floor leader rise, please?
Floor leader.
Hi.
Hi, thank you. Did the cigar wholesale people weigh in on this? Is this just cigarettes or is it cigars too?
I believe it's just cigarettes, and all it says is the information you provide to the comptroller's office must be accurate and complete, because the comptroller's office cannot accurately assess taxation if they don't know the brand and quantity of the products that have been sold. That's all.
So
That's all it does.
They have to fill out a form for the comptroller, and we have to tell them to fill it out right? I mean, we need a law to tell them to fill their form out right?
Well, apparently right now, the comptroller has to share that information with the AG's office, which is the enforcement unit. And the information is so off. Sometimes it requires a lot of staffing time and the government's time to track them down to know how to accurately assess taxation. And so all it says is basically adding several words. So we already require them to provide information. All it does, this bill does, is to say the information must be accurate and complete so that it will save a lot of time. In fact, the bill has stripped any provisions about penalty because we already have that in the law.
No penalty.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Is there any further debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 95 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 541, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 542, public safety, emergency management, consumer protections against price gouging.
Is on third reading and final passes. Is there any debate? Gentleman from Harvard.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in opposition to this bill. So what this bill does during the state of emergency, because of a rash of complaints of price gouging, largely because businesses were being forced to raise prices because of supply chain issues, because of inflation and things of that nature, the AG's office became overwhelmed with complaints for price gouging. So as a stopgap emergency measure to try to mediate or triage some of these issues, they created basically what was a mediation mechanism where they would go and say, well, instead of us prosecuting you, show us your books, prove to us that you're not doing this, and then we'll move on. Well, the problem with that is, and as the bill's written, that puts the burden of proof onto the small businesses. And that's a huge problem, right? When it comes to an individual trying to prove their innocence. So it doesn't require the AG's office to determine or investigate if this small business is or is not violating the law or price gouging. It just says, hey, we now have the right, based on any complaint, to come and look at your books. And we've had lots of conversations about small business impacts on this floor today. And think about this. Who here on this floor has a small business that sells gas, that sells toilet paper, that sells food, that sells any product that may be subject to inflation or state of emergency? Every one of your businesses who may get a complaint, and if one person complains on every single business in your district, they will all have to go through this process. And if you're a small business owner or work for a small business and the AG's office comes calling, what are you going to do? You're going to lawyer up to protect yourself, because this is too big to play with. The AG's office is well-funded and well-staffed, and when they come with a mandate. And this bill puts all of your small businesses in a defensive posture. So this mediation process, what it does, it allows the AG's office to come after a business without having proof to prosecute. So now any business just on a complaint, the AG's office can initiate this process. And if you cannot prove that the price gouging was outside of your control, then they can now take another step and actually prosecute you. So this gives them a chance to investigate without probable cause. That's what this bill does. We have to protect our consumers and our citizens from price gouging. Price gouging is a despicable practice. If this bill simply left the burden of proof on the AG's office and left this mediation process in, I think it would be a good bill. But sadly, this puts all the pressure on our small businesses. So just consider the position by voting for this bill that you are going to put the small businesses in your community in if a complaint is just made. Completely unfounded complaint. And my bigger concern is the Attorney General's office can assess from a macro point of view that if every gas station in the state of Maryland under a state of emergency has to raise their gas prices by $1 because supply chain issues has happened nationwide, it's very plain for them to see that. But this bill doesn't give the AG the ability to account for that. And so we're going to say every single business in our state is equally colluding to raise prices at the same time. And that's really hard to believe. So because of the burden of proof in this bill, I'm going to be voting red in this bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Floor Leader. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I thank the delegate for his intent. And you might be surprised that I actually agree with your intent of whatever you are proposing that we should have added that we didn't add. But you might be also surprised to know that the bill already includes language to say the burden of proof is on the government. In fact, it says the government not only has to inform, it has to reach out to engage, to give businesses an opportunity to explain, and then as a final resort, the AG's office can go after for enforcement. So what you are calling the mediation process is what they call the pre-enforcement process, which already exists. So first the bill says the Secretary of State's office has to establish a protocol by which they can inform businesses of the state of emergency. To say the governor just declared the state of emergency, and by the way, here's a list of essential goods and services that you cannot be price gouging on, okay? And if, and only if when people complain, they're not gonna actively go out and hunt down take photos of the prices on your chart or whatever, goods and services. Only when people complain, then they have to, by law, respond to the complaints. And even in that process, during the past couple of years of the pandemic, when we authorized the previous governor to do pretty much the same thing, what ended up happening was of the almost 1,000 complaints that the AG's office received, vast majority of them were resolved resolved without having to go through the enforcement process, because they simply reached out to businesses and gave them a chance to explain that this was because of the prices they had to pay due to supply chain issues, due to, you know, everybody else was selling it at that price, that they had to be competitive, whatever the reason was. So vast majority of them were resolved. And that's exactly what the bill already does. So there is a mediation process. The burden of proof is already on the AG's office. I urge everyone to vote for this bill, which is nothing new. We already authorized the previous governor to do exactly the same. And we are simply be prepared for the next whatever unforeseen emergency circumstances. So thank you, and I would urge a green vote.
Is there any further debate?
Briefly, Madam Speaker.
Minority Leader.
Very briefly. I think and I appreciate what my colleague from Montgomery County is talking about with respect to efforts to try to ameliorate the consequences of this price gouging law for people who did not violate it. But I still think that what the law will provide is once the Attorney General actually decides we're going to bring a case, we're going to bring an action under this bill with all of the penalties attendant with it, that there is a shifting of the burden of proof. Normally, in most cases, what occurs is the civil defendant or a defendant in an administrative proceeding does not have the burden of proof of proving themselves not culpable or not liable for the charges levied. Certainly we understand in our criminal system it's a very, very high burden for the state. We're talking about civil cases. The burden generally is with the plaintiff or is generally with the administrative agency, and this would turn that on its head a little bit, and I think that that's what the intent of the gentleman from Harford County was. None of us want to see price gouging. None of us want to see people in emergency conditions benefit from the misery of others, economically or otherwise, but we do have to build in appropriate safeguards and protections for our businesses, and this bill, in my view, goes just slightly too far. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Floor Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to say the last word that I appreciate the debate, and I said at the beginning that we agree in spirit the burden of proof should be on the government, which is exactly what the current process is. In fact, this bill specifically stripped by amendment any provisions of penalty, because we already have Maryland Consumer Protection Law that takes care of this deceptive trade practices penalty. So all it does is to say when consumers complain, the government has a responsibility to respond, and in the course of responding, it would first reach out to engage and give businesses an opportunity to show that this is in case the market supply and demand issue, how do you expect the government to act otherwise, right? To automatically get into enforcement mode, that is not what we're trying to do. So I think this is the most reasonable course we're talking about, so with that, I urge in favorable vote.
Is there any further debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 97 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 542, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 672, alcoholic beverages, use of alcoholic beverages for educational purposes.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 132 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 672, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read next bill.
Senate Bill 723, corporations and associations, electronic copies fee, repeal.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 133 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 723, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Calendar of third reading, Senate Bills number 8. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 187, Health Occupations, Licenses, Certificates, and Registrations, Lawful Presence and Identification Numbers.
It's on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? Gentlelady from Carroll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. May the floor leader rise for a few questions?
Floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes. Thank you. Good afternoon. So this bill has been amended. Can you just give me a brief overview as to what this bill does as of today?
Sure. What this bill does is it modernizes our healthcare occupational licensing to include Social Security number, I-10 number, and government affidavits for when people are applying.
Okay, so if you're not a citizen and you don't have, what documentation other than Social Security card, what documentation is now going to be allowed?
Under the bill, or do you mean currently?
Under the bill
Under
now.
the bill, an I-10 or a government affidavit.
And what's the government affidavit?
A government affidavit is a document proving that you are somewhere in the immigration process.
Okay, who issues that?
That would be USCIS.
Okay. And so what was the purpose of the bill?
The purpose of the bill is to modernize us so that our nursing shortage can be addressed primarily. There's also a physical therapy shortage. So we are behind, I think, 26 other states. What's happening is that people, in order to come here and work as nurses in the state of Maryland, first they'll have to go to Texas or Florida and spend a period of time there where they can get an I-10 number or Social Security number, and then they come here. And so what's happening as a result is that we have the longest wait times for emergency rooms in the country.
So before we came down to session, we had our briefings from our local hospital, and I'm very aware of the nursing shortage, but there's a couple things. I'm just curious if this was addressed or discussed, because part of having to bring folks from overseas rather than employing citizens, our Board of Nursing, the license office, is behind by 6 months to a year or more. Is that correct?
There's significant issues with the Board of Nursing, and we're working as a committee to address them and to modernize them.
Because I feel like if we were looking for solving that problem, I think that would have been a much better idea. We have military folks that have been working as nurses in the service, and they're not able to get their paperwork processed or done quickly. So I think I feel that I won't be voting for the bill, because I feel that we really should have addressed helping people that live here lawfully first to address this nursing shortage.
Well, I would say that there's been legislation introduced this session for modernizing and expediting healthcare licensing for military spouses and military personnel. I don't have it committed to memory what the status of that bill is, but I know there was something introduced to that end. And to your second comment about people being lawful residents, you can be a lawful resident and have an I-10 number. I've said on the committee's floor before, Social Security numbers are just for permanent status. So if you are a U.S. citizen by birth, you will have a Social Security number. If you are a legal permanent resident, you will have a Social Security number. It's also a green card. But people who are here working legally will not have a Social Security number unless you are a permanent resident. So if you're on a nursing visa, you would have an I-10.
Okay, well, thank you for answering my questions. But again, I feel that, you know, my former colleague would always say, what problem are we trying to solve? And I think we know one of the biggest problems is the license process, and I just think this is the wrong solution. But thank you for your answers.
Gentlelady from Hartford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would the floor leader answer one other question I was just looking at?
Sure, with pleasure.
Thanks. So when you adjusted in the bill, and I'm hoping I'm looking at the latest reading of it, there was some information that was stricken about qualifications as far as training and professional requirements. Was that replaced somewhere else that I'm not seeing? Because the only thing it looks like it was replaced with was that they may not deny because of being lawfully present and the social security number part. But it's, yeah, anyway.
Sure. So two parts to your question. One, this bill doesn't change any of the qualifications or the standards for getting a healthcare occupational license. It's the bill as fully amended keeps the standards the same. It just opens up the pool of applications. And then, I'm sorry, what was the other part of your question?
I'm just saying they have to be duly either accredited, licensed,
Sure,
educated. There has to be some kind of.
Sure, yeah, the
Professional.
standards have not changed. It just simply opens up the pool of applicants. The context for your question is that we had to adopt a number of amendments to make us federally compliant, and the part of the code that you're referencing that we were amending on is actually from Arkansas. We took the legislature of Arkansas's legislation and adopted it onto our bill. They were our inspiration.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure everyone's going to be fully qualified.
Is there any further debate?
Madam Speaker.
Yes, gentlelady from Anne Arundel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the floor leader. So my question, given this line of questioning, I understand. So I have like clients who have Social Security numbers, who have green cards, who've been here for 30 years. They're working, and they have not pursued citizenship yet. So the I-10 number, is that something that someone who is not here, like legally, is able to obtain?
The IRS provides the I-10 number. It's not USCIS. So if you're trying to get legal, some type of legal status, that would be through USCIS. But the IRS has no immigration enforcement authority, but they do need to tax you. And so if you're working here and you plan on paying taxes, then you would need an I-10 in order to do so. So those are two different systems within the federal government.
I see. Okay, so if someone, that kind of clarifies it. So if someone is here illegally and they're able to obtain an I-10 number, and so under this bill they would be able to work in these health occupations?
No. It is in federal law that you cannot employ someone who is unlawfully in the country. That is U.S. Code 1324A that describes all of the reasons why, all the penalties and all the ways that you would violate the law by hiring someone who's here without legal status. So this bill increases the number of people who can apply, but it doesn't guarantee them a job.
Okay, so you're saying no one can apply for these positions who's not here legally. They're just not necessarily U.S. citizens. Is that the case?
So you can apply under this bill. You can apply with a Social Security number, which means that you have some type of legal permanent status, with an I-10 number, which means that you've gone to the IRS and says that I'm planning on working here, I need to pay taxes, or with a government affidavit saying that you are somewhere within the process of getting legal status. So you have to have one of those three documents in order to apply. What that does not do is give you legal permanent status. That's a federal thing. It does not give you a job. You have to find an employer to do that. It simply opens up the pool of people who can apply.
Okay, so I appreciate those answers. I just want to be very clear because I think that's the issue people are having. So, like, yes or no, under this bill, this would not allow anyone here illegally to work in these fields. Is that correct?
There is nothing in this bill that explicitly says that we are not going to allow undocumented people to work in these industries, and that is because it is already against federal law to employ them.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Speaker.
Gentlelady from Hartford.
Thank you. That exchange just really inspired me to come up and bring a little bit more sanity to this complicated topic. People who are undocumented or here illegally work every day in the state of Maryland. People hire them. I know people who are here personally. They're wonderful people. They're good people. They're still breaking the law. Here's the deal. There's nothing expressly written in this bill that prevents those folks from working. There's nothing expressly in this bill that prevents these organizations from hiring subcontracting firms who then hire people. And that is traditionally the way this is done. One firm decides they're going to hire people who are undocumented, they're going to take the risk, they're going to break the federal rules, and then another firm will hire that firm. So for anyone who's on the fence, as I have been about this bill, this will absolutely allow for people who are working on subcontractors as subcontracts for other firms to be hired into our health occupations. So I will be red on this bill.
Is there any further debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 105 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 187, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 213, Health Occupations, Clinical Nurse Specialist Prescribing.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 129 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 213, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read next bill.
Senate Bill 246, Wicomico County Sanitary District Authorization.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker?
Is everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 132 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 246, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 275, Hunting, Snares, Traps, and Other Similar Devices Identification Requirement.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 128 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 275, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read next bill.
Senate Bill 282, Maryland Forestry Education Fund Establishment.
It's on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 129 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 282, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 313, Town of Mount Airy, Carroll County and Frederick County Urban Renewal Authority.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 131 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 313, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read next bill.
Senate Bill 445, Appraisal Gap from Historic Redlining Financial Assistance Program Alterations.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 130 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 445, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Calendar of third reading, Senate Bills number 10. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 7, Environment On-Site Wastewater Services Board Fees and Penalties.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 97 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 7, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 34, Department of Agriculture, State Specialist for Value-Added Agriculture.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 129 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 34, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read next bill.
Senate Bill 80, Natural Resources Blue and Flathead Catfish Finfish Trout Line License Establishment.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 130 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 80, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read next bill.
Senate Bill 91, Natural Resources Apprentice Hunting License Alterations.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 123 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 91, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 166, Housing and Community Development Adaptive Reuse.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 129 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 166, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read next bill.
Senate Bill 193, Ground Leases, Collection of Rent, Interest, Fees, and Other Expenses, Registration Requirements.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There have been 130 votes in the affirmative. Senate Bill 193, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 196, Residential Ground Leases, Redemption and Extinguishment Requirements.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There be 130 votes in the affirmative. Senate Bill 196, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed.
Madam Speaker, sorry.
Gentlelady from Hartford.
Thank you. Vote change on SB 252 to yay. Vote change on SB 275 to yay.
Any other? Yes, gentleman from Hartford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Vote change Senate Bill 541 listed in the red, and Senate Bill 525 from yay to nay.
Gentleman from Carroll.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. Change of vote to red on SB 213.
Gentlelady from Baltimore County.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senate Bill 455 to yes.
Keep moving around. Gentleman from Western Maryland.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senate Bill 525 to nay.
Any other vote changes or anything else? Calendar of third reading, Senate Bills number 11. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 54, Criminal Law, Unnatural or Perverted Sexual Practice, repeal.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? I hope not. If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 115 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 54, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 71, execution on a judgment, child support arrearages, workers' compensation.
It's on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 129 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 71, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 74, grossly negligent or drunk or drugged operation of vehicle or vessel, prior convictions.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, very quickly to explain my vote.
All right, you have to explain your vote.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Very quickly, when we passed the House cross-file of this bill, it was a bill that was put forward by the delegate from northern Anne Arundel County who was not with us on that day when we passed that bill, so he didn't hear us, I think, when we actually passed that bill. I thought I'd mention that for the body. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Clerk will take the call. There being 131 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 74, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 106, courts, judgments, exemptions from execution.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 102 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 106, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 129, criminal law, sexual crimes, repeal of spousal defense.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 131 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 129, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read next bill.
Senate Bill 150, Maryland Tort Claims Act, denial of claims, notice.
It's on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 130 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 150, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read next bill.
Senate Bill 292, criminal law, victims of child sex trafficking and human trafficking, safe harbor and service response.
It's on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 133 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 292, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Calendar of third reading, Senate Bills number 30. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 173, automatic expungement, clarification.
It's on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 105 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 173, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read next bill.
Senate Bill 283, mental health workforce development fund established.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 129 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 283, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read next bill.
Senate Bill 327, hunting, wildlife, conservation, and outdoor recreation, funding, promotion, management, licenses, permits, and stamps.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 129 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 327, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read next bill.
Senate Bill 422, Natural Resources Black Bass Conservation Fund establishment.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 133 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 422, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read next bill.
Senate Bill 584, Public Health, Parkinson's Disease Advisory Committee and website.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 134 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 584, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read next bill.
Senate Bill 781, Offshore Wind Energy State Goals and Procurement Promoting Offshore Wind Energy Resources Act.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate?
Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from Anne Arundel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have an amendment at the desk, amendment number 113323.
Amendment number 1.
Move so much to be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before I offer the amendment, will the floor leader please rise for a couple questions?
Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, and I appreciate you allowing me to offer this amendment on the Senate bill since it wasn't ready for the House bill. When I was looking at the bill, I noticed that PJM is in there quite often. Can you explain to me what PJM is and what they do?
Sure. PJM is the Regional Transmission Organization. They are responsible for ensuring reliability across the 13 states. There's 13 states that are members. Maryland is one of the members. They ensure the reliability through the management of the capacity market. They manage the wholesale electricity market, the ancillary markets. They also manage transmission planning and development, which is why they're featured so heavily in the bill. They also are responsible for interconnection and a lot of the interconnection queues and those kinds of things. So the role that they play in this bill specifically is that the Public Service Commission will work with PJM because that partnership is really important in order to plan and coordinate the transmission that is getting studied and planned for in this bill.
So they kind of oversee our grid amongst the 15 states, or however many
13,
states.
yeah.
13 states. Make sure that it's reliable, and then they're also looking into the future, I'm assuming, on how we're going to get our reliable energy sources in the future. Is that correct?
They are responsible for the transmission and they're responsible for the capacity, which addresses the capacity market, addresses the reliability. That's right. They also manage the wholesale market and ancillary markets and other components of the electric system.
And they conduct studies and reports.
Sure, yeah, that's part of what they do.
I ask because I've looked it up, and there's a study that in a report that just came out on February 23rd of 2023. I don't know if you've gotten a chance to take a look at this. I know this is really in your wheelhouse as far as
I live for
subject matter. Did you happen to take a look at it?
I'm not sure the specific report you're talking about.
Okay, I'm going to tell you what it says. It says, the growing mismatch between demand and the construction of new power generating sources, particularly intermittent sources such as wind and solar, present increasing risk due to reliability, due to potential timing mismatch between resource retirements, load growth, and the pace of new generation, entry under a possible low new entry scenario. The growth rate of electricity demand is likely to continue and increase from electrification coupled with proliferation of high demand data centers in the region. On top of thermal generators are retiring at a rapid pace. PJM, in that same study, I guess their goal is to have 94% renewables and 6% gas on this grid sometime in the future. Is it your belief that the offshore wind and solar can provide, in our current goals, the net zero greenhouse gas emission reduction targets established in Chapter 38 of the Acts of General Assembly from 2022?
So let me back you up, because I don't know what report you're talking about, but PJM doesn't have any goals. So PJM couldn't have a goal of 94% renewable and 6% gas. They leave the decisions about the generation mix up to the states, and then they work within the context of the policies that we state. So I don't have the report in front of me, so I can't speak to what it is that you're reading or where the 94% came from, but I can tell you for sure that PJM doesn't have a 94% anything goal.
It was part of what they were talking about in their queue, so maybe it's what they're getting from us.
Okay, so I can't answer that then. Their queue would be likely to have much more renewables in the queue because we have a lot of legacy plants of gas and coal and nuclear and some hydro, and most of the new stuff that is being built would be renewable. So that's not necessarily their goal, but that's what they're looking at in response to what's happening in the as a result of state policy. Yes.
Okay. And since this is in your wheelhouse, I'm assuming you know some of these things. There's currently about 240 coal plants that produce 22% of our electricity nationally that have been targeted for closure. We now currently have 71,000 wind towers that produce only 9% of the total electricity for the nation. We're adding about 6,000 per year, which I'm assuming that's part of why you have this study in there. And at least 150,000 more are needed to replace coal generation. It also says in that study we are drastically insufficient in the massive battery storage needed for the 70% of the time when wind produces little or no energy, and if we turn to solar, it only produces 3%. And I bring that up because we have these lofty goals, and I applaud the goals, but I think it's very difficult for us to meet these goals.
I don't know if you were reading national coal plants or if you're reading PJM coal plants. Kind of what's happening nationally is pretty irrelevant to Maryland. I mean, it matters for the planet for sure, but it's kind of irrelevant to Maryland. When we're looking at reliability within the state, what matters for us is what's happening within the PJM grid. And what matters for us is what's happening within Maryland itself and within what is connected to the Maryland grid. Now, the great news that I can tell you about offshore wind is that offshore wind is especially strong in the winter and at night. And so it actually is a very powerful force to sort of counteract when solar isn't shining. And so as we get closer to our 100% renewable energy, or 100% clean energy that we need to get to if we want to have a future on this planet, offshore wind is a really crucial piece of that mix, precisely because of when it is more likely to be producing electricity. The other thing is that it just while you're comparing things to coal, offshore wind actually has a 50% capacity factor, which is equivalent to coal and gas-fired power plants.
Okay. Thank you. Colleagues, I have an amendment at the desk. Here's what the amendment will do. It says before, I did the amendment number. Move so much to read the amendment again. Thank you.
So order again.
It just simply says before authorizing or approving the premature closure or retirement of any traditional electrical generational facilities, the Public Service Commission, in conjunction with PJM, must establish that 1, cost savings will result to customers as a result of the retirement of the electric generation facility. 2, the retirement will not result in insufficient amount of reliable or dispatchable capacity to serve customers. And 3, retirement of the electric facility will not adversely impact the availability or reliability of electric service to customers of the public utility. And this is important for several different reasons. Many of you already know we have hospitals that rely on this energy. We have medical facilities rely on this energy. We have military bases that rely on this energy. We have people that run off of medical products at home that rely off of this energy. You don't have to look far in California, and we like to follow them. They have rolling blackouts consistently because they can't meet the demand. One of the things that happened during COVID, if everybody remembers, we deemed some businesses essential, some non-essential. Where that came from was Homeland Security, after 9/11, said, listen, if anything ever catastrophic is ever to happen to this country again, we have to deem certain businesses essential, and we are going to prop them up because we need energy or people die. If we don't have reliable energy sources, people will die. All this bill is ensuring that we have reliable energy sources. If wind and solar provide that, God willing, we'll do it that way. This amendment is just allowing us to say, if it can't provide the energy we need, that we won't close down these power supply companies, traditional power supply companies. Lastly, here's what the bill does, or the amendment. It must also consider potential disruption of large areas of critical habitat, negative impacts on threatened or endangered wildlife, stresses to local watershed, and other ecological harms of similar nature. We debated this a little bit yesterday, and sure enough, another dolphin dead rolls up onto the beach in Ocean City. Coincidence? I don't know. With that, Madam Speaker, I push the amendment.
Question for the House. Oh, I'm sorry, floor leader. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Couple things. There was a lot there. First, let me just start by saying thank you for highlighting the importance of health. One of the reasons to move this bill is because there are hundreds of people in Maryland dying every year, thousands of people across the country, and millions of people across the world dying every year from fossil fuel pollution. So in our concern about health and saving lives, this is a really important bill to shift to clean energy. Second, I'd like to talk about the amendment. I appreciate that you started by talking about PJM, because the reason I need to ask this body to reject this amendment is precisely because it is PJM and not the Public Service Commission who's responsible for commissioning and decommissioning electric generation. So you may know that in 1999, we deregulated our utilities, and in so doing, we moved the responsibility of the deregulation and the regulation and the capacity and the reliability from PSC to PJM. The amendment reads as though it was written for a state that has vertically integrated utilities. So it talks about these things happening in a utility rate case in front of the Public Service Commission, but we haven't since 2003 had a utility rate case in front of the Public Service Commission that addressed issues of generation. So I think what you potentially want to do is direct PJM to do one thing or another. We can't do that at the state level, unfortunately. I'd love to direct PJM as well. But this amendment is essentially unworkable because since 1999, we've had a deregulated market, and so the way this is written just doesn't fit with the way our state law is written. So for those reasons, Madam Speaker, I urge that we reject this amendment.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed?
Roll call.
Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Okay. Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails. Senate Bill 781 is on
Madam-
third reading and final passage.
Madam Speaker.
You have an amendment?
I do not, and I will be relatively brief. But I spent a good 2 hours working on this morning.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A solid 2 hours, members. So, I'm reading the title of the bill, Promoting Offshore Wind Energy Resources Act, and I'm reminded as to how long the state of Maryland and our country has been moving towards offshore wind. And the truth is, we've been at this since 2009, and we are still trying to promote offshore wind energy, and it begs the question, why is that? And, I've got an article from the Associated Press from 2009, the then Secretary of Interior, Ken Salazar, talking about the creation of renewable energy zones to smooth development of offshore wind projects. And what I think he means when he says smooth development, he means go over all the rough spots, get rid of all the opposition, and do what we've got to do to make offshore wind happen. Of course, in the same article, they quote the U.S. Senator from Massachusetts, Edward M. Kennedy, who argued it would kill birds, endanger sea life, and imperil the area's tourism and fishing industries. That was an article from 2009, yet here we are today still talking about the efforts to promote offshore wind energy when we already know in 2009 what were the issues going to be. And have we worked for the past decade plus to resolve some of the emerging issues that were coming from these states and the Atlantic coasts as it relates to the wildlife? And we actually brought an amendment on the House floor yesterday on the same issue. In addition, in 2010, along with our governor at the time, Martin O'Malley, you'll remember some here when we established this, a Smart from the Start initiative to speed offshore wind energy development off the Atlantic coast. And the nature of the Interior Secretary Ken Salazar's comments are to facilitate leasing construction of new projects, spurring the rapid and responsible development of this abundant renewable resource. Well, I don't think anybody sitting here in 2023 would say that our then Obama Cabinet Secretary achieved the goal of rapid and responsible development of this abundant renewable resource. And the point that I'm trying to make to you is that in 2023, why do we not have offshore wind turbines? Well, the answer is that there's something amiss. And the legislature in Maryland and also in the United States, I think, is missing and or trying to gloss over some essential difficulties with putting offshore wind in place. One of those could be the ratepayer impact, the significant subsidies that come from the taxpayer, both federally and our state of Maryland, and the reliability component, because at the end of the day, this is not cheap energy. It's the most expensive form of energy and the least reliable, which means you don't actually displace reliable forms of energy by putting offshore wind off the coast of Ocean City. What you end up doing is having at good times some energy, but when you need it most, during, say, a summertime when there's hurricanes, and I assure you that these wind turbines will be shut down when that happens, and during the wintertime when we have nor'easters that are, you freeze these turbines, they don't operate at points where our state needs the energy most, and PJM needs that energy most. So to the maker of the amendment prior to mine, comments here, I think he's on target here, that we have a multi-state consortium that has a responsibility to deliver energy in a multi-state fashion, a reliable fashion, and yet we're going to advance goals like this when we know we've got some difficulties. The other comment that I'll make about this is that there is currently in Congress conversations about the impact over whale deaths. And I know we didn't want to talk a great deal about it in committee, but let me just say this is an article from March 30th of this year where an amendment was introduced on the House floor. It was a 244 to 189 vote. There were Democrats that voted for this, that would require the Government Accountability Office to investigate the environmental review process for offshore wind projects carried out by BOEM, like my good colleague mentioned before, saying we've got this. Well, if we've got this, why are a bipartisan effort from our congressman actually saying, well, no, we don't have this. We need to research and investigate this. And it would also require the GAO to investigate the impacts or adverse effects that offshore wind development might have on whales and other marine life. In addition, there were 2 U.S. senators from New Jersey, which is where the last and most recent conflict is arising when it comes to whales and dolphins dying. Both Cory Booker and Bob Menendez of New Jersey called on in a letter to NOAA, who apparently has this, to release more information about the concerning recent uptick in humpback and North American right whale deaths. So I'm going to close, Madam Speaker, to say this, that we're passing a bill promoting offshore wind, and we've been talking about in this legislature for well over a decade promoting offshore wind, and yet here in Ocean City on the Eastern Shore, have we really sat down with the community and had a reasonable dialogue about what these impacts are going to be? Have we had a reasonable dialogue with the ratepayer about what the cost of energy is going to be? Have we talked about to the citizens of Maryland how much more difficult it'll be when we fully count on offshore wind to have reliable baseload energy without rolling blackouts and brownouts like California? I believe that we've not done that yet, and I think it does require some questionings before we actually start promoting additional massive increases to offshore wind. So, Madam Speaker, I appreciate you granting me the 4 or 5 minutes to talk on this. You might imagine from the Eastern Shore that this is an issue near and dear to my heart and people that I care a great deal about. But, you know, we have in Maryland, each of our districts, people that you represent, both property owners and people that go to Ocean City to enjoy their summers and springs and falls and winters, and they don't go to the ocean to go see energy production in any fashion, whether it's a wind turbine or whether it's a oil drilling rig. They go to Ocean City to see the skyline, the shoreline, the vista, and you know, until we see these things on out in the ocean, you can expect somebody like me to stand and oppose this on its basis, and that's what I'm doing here, and we'll be voting against the bill.
Is there any further?
Madam Speaker.
Floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just do need to make sure that the body is aware, as you're preparing your hopefully green vote, that first of all, the Audubon Society is in support of this bill because any bird impacts can be mitigated, but the biggest cause of death for migratory birds is climate change. NOAA, we've discussed yesterday the technicalities of their role in protecting whales and the fact that they don't believe that the deaths have been related to offshore wind. The National Wildlife Federation and the National Aquarium, who work very hard on protecting marine wildlife, support this bill because they also know that the #1 threat to marine wildlife and all wildlife is climate change. And increasingly, an increasing threat to human life is climate change and the pollution of fossil fuels. And so for that reason, we need to move with utmost urgency to a clean energy future, and this is an important part of that. I urge a green vote.
Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from Calvin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity here. This is, it's amazing when I hear these speeches about how urgent we must act because of climate change, and yet the one reliable power source that would solve the problem is not considered renewable in Maryland, and that's nuclear power. Calvert Cliffs Nuclear Power Plant in my district produces more than 40% of the state's electricity with no CO2 emissions whatsoever. And if it were modernized and we put it in the renewable energy portfolio standard, then it could produce almost all of the state's renewable energy and all of its energy needs, period. In addition to that, we have Morgantown power plant that was shut down. It's a coal plant. It was shut down. It's in Charles County on the Potomac River right before you go over the Harry Nice Bridge into King George County, but it's on the Charles County side in Maryland. It's shut down. There's a grid, a massive grid that's already there. It's already built. That plant could be disassembled and a fraction of the land there could be used for nuclear power. Between those two plants, we could produce all of the green energy we needed in Maryland, because the modern nuclear power plants use spent nuclear fuel to power nuclear power plants. There is literally zero waste and there's no CO2 emissions. In Calvert County, Calvert Cliffs is on 1,100 acres, and only about 110 of those acres consists of the plant itself. The other acreage, the other 1,000 acres, is preserved on the Chesapeake Bay. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful piece of property. The footprint required for the modern nukes is a fraction of the 110 acres that the power plant already uses, and the citizens of Calvert County support it. Imagine that. So the young lady defending this bill gets up and says climate change is an existential threat and we must build wind turbines in the ocean, not knowing what damage it's going to do to the environment. And yet we already have a solution. And that's nuclear power. And because of politics, it's not in the renewable energy portfolio standard. There's no other reason for it. Offshore wind, it's pretty obvious the damage that it does. I mean, you would have to literally suspend critical thinking skills to think that you would have either floating turbines, which are anchored to the bottom of the sea, or pile-driven turbines, and think that is bad, to actually think that is good for the environment. Moreover, you have to send boats out there to replace the turbine blades, which aren't themselves renewable. And then you have to grease all the fittings with petroleum, because otherwise it doesn't turn very well. That's not renewable. In fact, there's nothing about wind turbines that's renewable, because you have to keep replacing them. And so I have to say, it's fascinating to me to hear this argument year after year, and I know that it's true that the PSC is doing studies about nuclear and so forth. Do we really need to study it? We already know it works. We already know there's no emissions from the nuclear power plants whatsoever. So it gets a little tiring in this body as a Republican to constantly hear the virtue signaling of how climate change is an existential threat, but you really don't want to solve the problem. We've solved the problem in Calvert County, and we're willing to solve the entire problem. Let us do it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Chairman of the committee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just feel like at some points we get caught up in this tornado of misinformation. And that's kind of where we are now. To be clear, I mean, every time we talk about the environment, we get this argument, hey, do nothing. It's almost like, should we go back to wood-burning stoves and coal? Is that where it's at? I mean, the point about the future is moving forward. So we're arguing that, well, there are some downsides to wind turbines. They block the skyline. Well, I've been to Ocean City, and where my buddy's apartment is, he can't see the skyline because of these beautiful hotels y'all have built. I don't know what that skyline is, but I do understand that the goal was to put them 11 miles out. We talk about Morgantown and coal. Yeah, natural gas priced out coal. That's why the coal plant in my town stopped. We can't pretend that the future is coal. We can't pretend that the future is gas. We know where the future lies. Are we going to invest in it? And when we talk about nuclear, I mean, we worked on this bill last year, the Climate Solutions Now, to put that in for the next 40 years, including small modular nuclear facilities. They're not going to be as large as Calvert Cliffs, but they will be dependable, and they will be hopefully that go-between because it is a non-emitting energy source. Please don't say we're not doing these things, because we are. But we're also doing windmills. We're also promoting solar. We're going to cover all of the bases, but what we're not going to do is step backward into the old days of burning coal. Okay, yeah, we've got it, but we don't have a lot of it. We don't have a lot of these resources, these natural resources. So we have to move forward. It's just every time we talk about the environment, we get all this, no, do nothing. Stop it. Stop thinking, let's just go back to what my grandparents did. Well, some of us don't call that the good old days anyway, because it wasn't. But more importantly, we've got to move forward. This is what our body does. We look, we lay it all out and say, this is the path. If you don't believe solar is advanced, some of those folks, like the chair of E&T, remember the solar watches or the solar calculators. The moment you covered them up, what happened? They shut off. Look where we are now. Look at how far we've gone from an Apple E2 and the 486 computers to where we are now. You can carry one of those on your wrist. Investing in technology is the only way to advance technology. We are investing in this technology. The complaints that you brought up will be addressed because we're going to invest in that. The NEPA study will look at everything that we were arguing on this floor about protecting wildlife, but what we will not do is stand still. Teddy Roosevelt said that the best thing you can do is the right thing. The second best thing you can do is the wrong thing, but the worst thing you can do is nothing. Let's not do nothing. Please support this bill.
Gentleman from St. Mary's.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That was a great speech. I don't think any of us asked about coal. That's not in the bill. The bill deals with wind turbines. Could the floor leader rise for a couple questions?
Floor leader.
Yeah, I'm under the impression, I saw a news article that these wind towers are 945 feet tall. Is that correct?
It depends on the make and the model. Some are, yep.
I mean, that's pretty tall. That's like twice the amount of distance that you can, have a daycare from your marijuana facility.
Okay.
So it's pretty tall. What is the disturbance of having a tower built in the ocean? What is the disturbance in the foundation that is required to build a 945-foot tower?
I'm not sure that I understand. What do you mean the disturbance of?
How big is the footer on the bottom of the ocean to build a 945-foot tower?
We can find that out for you.
Because that's 945 feet above the water, correct?
That's correct.
So how many towers are they planning on building out there?
Will probably be several hundred to get to 8.5 gigawatts.
So we're talking literally miles upon miles of ocean floor disturbance.
It would be between 10 miles and about 80 miles out from the shore. So if you can picture between 10 miles and 80 miles. So within
Well, you're talking about the distance of the actual windmills. I'm talking about the amount of disturbance.
I understand what you're saying. But within across the 70 miles is the space in which that would be happening.
Well, thank you for answering the question.
Yeah, it's significantly less than an oil platform is the bottom line. The amount of disturbance on the
per
ocean
tower?
floor. For all of that.
Okay. I mean, we don't have any oil platforms off the coast of Ocean City.
Thank God, but there are oil platforms up and down the coast.
Much less a few hundred. So thank you for answering those questions.
Sure.
Madam Speaker, I know we talked a lot about dead whales and dolphins. This is one of the most fertile grounds for fisheries in the United States, maybe in the world. And we have no idea what we're about to take into this. This is a lot of smoke and mirrors. There's other ways to get more efficient energy sources. My friend from Calvert County just mentioned a few. So look, instead of talking about coal and talking about the technology of the week, the one where all the, well, I was going to say something, yeah. Where they're at, it would make much more sense if we study this problem and vote red on this bill. Thank you.
Is there any further debate?
Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker.
One quick question from the floor leader, please.
Floor leader.
Madam Speaker.
Thank you so much. Did you say that the wind turbine, we're all listening, so we might be looking at our computers, but you said the wind turbine is going to be 945 feet tall?
The question was, are there some that are that tall? And I said there are some that are that tall. It will depend on the specific specs that the developers choose to work with.
That's 87 stories high, just for the edification of the body. And an oil platform is 477 feet, so that's half of the height of these wind turbines.
The question was about what is the disturbance on the ocean floor, and I actually got an answer to that question, which is because it's a monopile, it is the exact same as the width of the turbine itself. So it's whatever that is, 20 feet by 20 feet or something like that per turbine.
Okay, thank you, but it is twice the height of an oil platform. So, and finally, I would just say that I learned in the good delegates bill about bird-safe buildings that the #1 killer of birds is cats. So not climate change, but feral cats. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any further debate?
Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker.
Recognizing the gentleman from Montgomery. Recognizing the gentleman from Montgomery.
Oh, thank you. I couldn't hear with all the chatter. I move the previous question, Madam Speaker.
To explain your vote? There's no vote. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Ayes have it. Senate Bill 781 is on third reading and final passage. Clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote
Madam Speaker.
or explain their vote? Yes, gentleman from East Central.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to explain my red vote and correct. Whenever there's something stated on the floor that's incorrect, I think it's important that we correct it for the record. So it was incorrectly stated as to the amount of disturbance from the monopile. So from what I have from U.S. Wind, the monopile diameter is anywhere from 26 to 39 feet. However, U.S. Wind intends to include scour protection in the form of rock around the base of the monopile, an area approximately 3 times the diameter of the foundation. So there's a quarter acre of a disturbance to the ocean floor for every turbine that's out there. So that's my reason for voting red on this, and there's many more, and thank you for the opportunity.
Clerk will take the call. There being 100 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 781, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed.
Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from Hartford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just have a vote change on SB 173 from yay to nay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker. Vote change also, please.
Baltimore County.
I just want to be recorded in the green for SB 91 and SB 327. Thank you.
All right. Calvert.
SB 327 to red.
Gentleman from Hartford. Western Maryland.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Vote change Senate Bill 283 from yay to nay.
Any other vote changes?
Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from Montgomery.
Thank you. Vote change SB 275 to green. Thank you.
Any other vote changes? Okay. House bill amended in the Senate. House Bill 471. The clerk will read the bill and the Senate amendments.
House Bill 471, Economic Development, Regional Institution, Strategic Enterprise Zone Program Alterations and Financing.
Recognizing the committee chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The motion is to not concur with the Senate amendments.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Amendments are rejected. Clerk will read the message to the Senate.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the House of Delegates refused to concur in the Senate amendments and respectfully request that the Senate recede from its position. Should the Senate prefer a conference committee to confer the disagreeing votes of the two houses, the House appoints Delegate Blackfitch-Carr, Chair, Delegate Hartman, and Delegate Vogel. Said bill is returned herewith.
House bill amended in the Senate. House Bill 770. The clerk will read the bill and the Senate amendments.
House Bill 770, Blueprint for Maryland's Future, publicly funded pre-kindergarten Maryland Consortium on Coordinated Community Supports and Career Ladder Alterations.
Recognizing the committee chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Move to not concur with the Senate amendments.
Motion for the House is to not concur in the Senate amendments. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Couldn't tell. The ayes have it. The amendments are rejected. The clerk will read the message to the Senate.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the House of Delegates refused to concur in the Senate amendments and respectfully request the Senate recede from its position. Should the Senate prefer a conference committee to confer on the disagreeing votes of the two houses, the House appoints Delegate Ebersol, Chair, Delegate Hornberger, and Delegate Wilkins. Said bill is returned herewith.
That ends the work at the desk. Committee announcements, appropriations.
Will not meet tonight, Madam Speaker.
Judiciary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, the House Judiciary Committee will resume bill hearings at 5:15, followed by a voting session.
Environment and Transportation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Environment and Transportation Committee will have a brief voting session at 5 o'clock.
Ways and Means.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Ways and Means Committee will not be meeting this evening.
Economic Matters.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The House Economic Matters Committee will not be meeting this evening.
Health and Government Operations.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Health and Government Operations Committee will be meeting immediately after session for a quick voting session.
Any subcommittee announcements? Yes. What is education?
Education. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Education Subcommittee of Ways and Means will meet at 9 a.m. tomorrow on Zoom.
Public Health.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Public Health and Minority Health Disparities Subcommittee will not be meeting, but the AOT work group will be meeting tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. on Zoom.
Any other subcommittees? Okay. Any delegation announcements?
Madam Speaker.
Delegation announcements. Anne Rundle.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just a reminder that the Anne Arundel County delegation will be meeting for a delegation photo tomorrow at 9:45 a.m.
No other delegation. Yes.
Could I do a vote change on Senate Bill 283 from yea to nay and Senate Bill 327 yea to nay?
Bring up the slips.
Madam Speaker. Go ahead, John.
I don't know who got up first.
Sorry, I forgot one more. It was SB 322 to green. Thank you.
Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from Baltimore County.
House Bill 988 to red.
Get your slips up. Any caucus announcements?
Madam Speaker.
Yes.
Yes, Bill 283, I want to be recorded as read.
Is there any other vote changes?
Thank you.
Any other vote changes? Okay. All right. Any other caucus announcements? Any personal or guest announcements? Quorum called before adjournment.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their presence? Clerk will take the call. There being 135 members present, the House is still in session, recognizing the majority leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that the House stands adjourned until Wednesday, April 5th at 10 a.m., Legislative Day, March 24th.